Alright, in this video we are going to talk about read-only domain controllers. This is going to be a two-part video. The first one here, I'm going to discuss what a read-only domain controller is. We're going to set one up, and then we're going to talk about how to delegate control of that RODC and why we'd want to. And the second video is going to be talking about the password replication, denied password replication and allowed password replication, what it is and why we need to set that. I'm doing this in two parts because I want to record the setup of it, and then I want to experiment a little bit with firewall rules in Azure to try and limit connectivity between the RODC and clients and the primary domain controller in my Azure tenant, so I can kind of demo what that replication is going to be, and I don't know what that's going to look like yet. So we're going to set it up and talk about it in this one. We're going to do some password replication stuff and demoing in the next one. In the page I have up, we've got the documentation from Microsoft on read-only domain controllers. I'll make sure I've got that up. Yep. I only have this up for one thing, and that is to show or to demonstrate what Microsoft specifically outlines as the need or requirement for an RODC, and that is right here. This is the only thing that really matters. So with an RODC, organizations can easily deploy domain controller in locations where physical security cannot be guaranteed. The reason I have this up and the reason I'm pointing that out is because there's a lot of different scenarios where you will see companies or organizations deploy RODCs in places where it doesn't actually make sense to have one. I'm blanking on any example off the top of my head, but I've definitely worked with other organizations where they have spun up RODCs almost just as like satellite locations just because they can. But the only reason you ever really need to consider that is if you cannot physically lock or isolate that domain controller. And the reason that's a big deal, the reason you protect your domain controllers is domain controllers have a copy of your domain database in them as a file. So if you lose access or if that file gets compromised and someone gets a copy of it, at that point they can attempt brute force attacks against that file as much as they want with plenty of time to figure out different passwords. So if your Active Directory database gets compromised and someone gets a copy of it, at that point your entire domain is compromised and you have to basically change everything. So for an RODC, it's possible if you did not have that server locked away or physically protected, it's possible for someone to come in and just take the server and leave. And now they've got your server, they've got all the files that were on that server, including your Active Directory database file, and you don't know what's going to happen at that point because someone has access to just try and compromise that freely. So Microsoft compensated for that by providing RODCs, which is basically just a domain controller, but instead of a traditional domain controller where it has an entire copy of that database, it only has a very select few users that you have to manually specify who have their passwords replicated to the DC and stored there. And that is only in case that satellite office or wherever they have the RODC loses connectivity to the domain. Anyone's passwords who have been replicated to the RODC can still log in because they can authenticate against the RODC. Otherwise, if regular network connectivity exists, they're still navigating back across to your regular domain controllers for authentication if their passwords aren't replicated. So basically, it narrows the scope considerably for the type of users or the number of users that can be compromised if that database was stolen. That is the use case. I'm going to switch back to my demo environment here, and we'll go ahead and set up our read-only domain controller. So if I go to servers, I have an RODC P1 server and an RODC client that I set up. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to RODC P1 to go through this setup. I have not logged into the server yet, so it's going to take a few minutes. All right. Server manager's up. Gotta wait for this to load so we can add roles. Cool. Next, next, next. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and install Active Directory Domain Services. And we'll tell it to install automatically, or restart automatically if needed. I don't think this installation takes that long, so I'm just going to go ahead and sit here and wait. I may just cut out the video at this point if it's going to take a long time. While this is doing this, actually, let's go ahead and we're going to set up a separate Active Directory site for our RODC clients. I don't know if this is necessary, but we might as well talk about it so we're aware. So I'm going to open Sites and Services. If you are unfamiliar with Active Directory Sites and Services, essentially this is what you use to segment authentication traffic in your domain. You can create different subnets. We have 3 currently. I have 10.0.0/24. This is our Active Directory. This is the subnet our domain controller is on. That's going to go in default for site name. I also have 10.0.10/24. This is what our management server and other application servers are on. That's also going to go in default for a site name. I'm going to create a new site and call it RODC. And the site link is basically what it uses for replication traffic. And I'm going to create my last subnet, 10.0.20/24. This is our RODC P1 server and our RODC client server on this subnet, and I'm going to add them to the RODC site. And I don't have a server yet. For this one, it should be ADP1. Okay, so what this is doing in a nutshell is you can use Active Directory Sites and Services to specify subnets that your clients are going to be on, and you associate the subnet with the site, and every site has servers that are linked to it. And what that does is if you link a subnet to a site, it's going to prefer the servers that are linked to that site for authentication. So when I stand up an RODC, I'm going to come into my RODC site. I'm going to add that server here, and then I'm going to specify the 10.0.2 subnet to the RODC site. And what that's going to do is, by default, anything in 10.0 or 10.1 are going to use my ADP1 server, and anything in 10.2 is going to use RODC. Now, this is a great way to try and control authentication traffic from your environment just generally, but it is not like absolute. So if an RODC is not available in 10.2, the clients will just know to go back to another site and pick a different server, and you can specify weight and everything. We're not going to get into it, but that's generally how you can control authentication traffic in your environment. Now let's switch back to RODC. It looks like that installation is finished. Close, and we will go to our post installation configuration. All right, we're going to add this to an existing domain. Yep. Next. And under our domain controller options, this is where we specify if it's going to be an RODC or a regular server. So I'm going to check the box to make this a read-only domain controller. And DSRM password. Okay. So we're going to talk about this in the next video, but this is where you specify the groups of users that are allowed to have the passwords replicated and the groups of users that aren't allowed to have their passwords replicated. The only thing I'm going to point out here is these groups already exist. They're in the users container in Active Directory by default, and they are named allowed password replication group or denied password replication group to make it as obvious as possible. Like I said, we'll talk about that in a future video. We're going to replicate from any domain controller, and I'm pretty sure this is all we need to just go with default options from there. And install. Now, this may take a little while. So initially I was going to talk about delegated administration for these two, but I think I'll save that for the next video as well. So this is as simple as it is for setting up our read-only domain controller. It's basically the exact same process for a regular domain controller. Just check a box for RODC and specify a couple of other groups. I'm going to let this go, and I will catch up with you guys in the next video.